last minute change of plans.
Yeah, well, glad you can make it. Basically, you guys saw the emails on the CCs and all that kind of stuff.
I haven't had a chance to review them all.
All right, I already sent them in now, but it should be good.
I'll trust your judgment.
Good. Gracias. So with that, welcome everybody, and Megan, it's Megan, right? Yes, Megan and Josh. Who starts?
So I'll start here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. As you may be aware by the calendar notice, we're here to take input from the three of you, and if Senator Rosenwald and Senator McConkey can make it as well as them. Statute requires us to come before both your committee as well as House ST&E, which we're doing later this morning, to gather your feedback in a public setting of what you'd like to see or what concerns you have or items or just sort of general feedback as we continue to develop the latest iteration of the state energy strategy. So there are, the statute, as you may be aware, I know there was a bill, I believe it was House Bill 189, that made one small tweak to the 8 of the areas that are required under the statute for us to consider. But it's including but not limited to. So there's wide latitude there for us to take a look at other things. So what we're here to do today is to take your feedback on what you'd like to see in the next iteration of the strategy. You know, things as basic as, does the format work? Are there areas we should expand upon? Are there topics that you would like to see discussed that we have not discussed? You know, are there improvements that we can make to this document that make it more easy for you, more relevant for you as you do your work here at the legislature and your colleagues do this kind of work? So this session is really designed to hear from you and get your input for this. It's not meant to necessarily be a debate or a discussion. You know, we're happy to answer questions and things like that, but really we're here to listen, take notes for your thoughts about what you'd like to see in this latest iteration of the state energy strategy. I would like to point out that this is not your last and only shot. We have public comments. We've extended them a couple of times that will now extend through the beginning of September, so September 2nd, just after Labor Day, for written comments. So it feels as though, including the folks in the audience, that this is not your one and only shot. If you have further thoughts or you want to develop something or you want to think about something more, you have until just after Labor Day to get those to us for consideration. So with that, we're happy to hear your thoughts.
I got one.
Yes.
I'm seriously looking at allowing the utilities to have their own generation in the state, and I'd like some feedback on that. If it's feasible, what might be some of the downfalls? I know that we have about 25 years ago said that wasn't allowed, but now I'm thinking maybe that wasn't the right approach, and maybe we can have some kind of a hybrid with that, and maybe allow nuclear. I don't know what's going to happen with some of the bills that we've gotten passed. I'd also like you to allow the House to approve all our bills next time.
Unanimous.
You know what? It's worth the ask. It's worth the ask. I'm flattered you think I have that about authority or control,
Well,
but
maybe
I'm flattered. I really am.
But I think that's a worthy conversation, allowing them to generate, because, you know, everybody I seem to talk to, it seems like New Hampshire is, you have to basically airlift everything in there. And it's time that we start maybe looking at, not going totally vertically integrated, but, you know, allowing the utilities to start partaking in their own generation in the state.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
No.
Okay. What, so when are you looking sort of a halfway in between, not quite return, as your comments mentioned, not quite back to a return to complete vertical integration, say that like Vermont has, for example, but
Right.
somewhere that's still allows wholesale markets to exist, but
Yes.
allows generation? Did you have a particular thought of how far in one direction, or is this sort of you're working on the idea? Not to put you on the spot. I'm just trying to get get a sense of.
I think maybe, like I said, like a hybrid, maybe allowing partially, but having the wholesale market as well as having the utilities to be able to generate their own, and that might help save some on the transmission end of it. You know, I don't know, but that's just an idea that I'm kicking around because it seems like we need to have all options on the table. So, Senator Waters?
Thank you, Art. Senator Pro, do you want to, you have anything, or Senator Pro?
No, I'm listening right now.
I have a few minutes I'll go through, if that's okay. Oh, and I just pulled the plug out.
I can get that. You want to borrow mine? Here, yes, and I'll, it's here.
It's supposed to go right there. I did it.
Well done.
Ta-da.
Be our new IT guy too.
Wired, as usual. Well, good morning. And, you know, I remember 2 years ago, remember? We were here for this same session. We were, yes. Anyways, good morning and thanks for all your work. I reread the last one and so forth. And I really don't envy you your task right now, because has there ever been a more uncertain time in terms of federal policy and state policy? So it's one of those things where I think we can make a beautiful plan, but so much is out of our hands, whether it's the federal government or ISO New England or our neighboring states. So I think that I would hope that the plan could really focus on what are we the masters of? What can we do that we can actually accomplish no matter what happens in these other policy realms? Because we're New Hampshire and we have to protect our interests and so forth. I have read the Clean Energy New Hampshire response to you and a couple of the other ones. And I think they're really very thorough and they have an expertise that I don't. And I'm sure you will very carefully go over those. I thought with the Clean Energy New Hampshire one that kind of a good point was to maybe become more focused and to group things and rather than the 10, to think about what do these categories really mean and how do they actually integrate with each other so that you see a policy that was coherent from its parts. And they had some of their suggestions, but I thought that in terms of looking back over the last one, it is kind of scattered, you know. I mean, what's the theme there and how does it move forward? I have just a few kind of touch points and categories. I think that we all know from the work we're doing in the legislature and nationally, and the industry, what it's looking at, that these are likely to be top line. I think resilience as a category is very useful for all kinds of things. And in particularly in the situation that we're in right now with the notion of carbon reduction and global warming. Now, you know, one can say that maybe New Hampshire's policy has been to this point that we're really not going to do much about that compared to other states because maybe we can't make an overall difference. And whether or not that is a rational thing, I don't really know. But therefore, I think our focus, unlike some of the other states, if it can't be on reducing carbon as a policy that drives technology and costs and so on and so forth, then I think we better look very carefully in this plan at what resilience do we need to deal with the impacts of climate change. Now, our statutory mandated science and technical advisory planning is beginning its every 5 years. That's a review of the data onto looking at sea level rise and extreme precipitation and other things. We do know that what used to be the outlying number of 1 to 3 feet in 2100, the 3 feet has now become the kind of baseline for 2100 from all the states around us are planning to that. And a recent report said that we probably could better plan for 3 feet by 2084. And what impact will that have on the resilience of the grid and of generation and those impacts of sea level and then also extreme precipitation? How hardened is our grid and what resources simply will be lost if we lose substantial parts of our coast? And very short time period too. And related to that, no matter what our policy may be in terms of carbon reduction, there's going to be much more demand for electricity. So how do we build a resilient system that can also accommodate what's likely to be a large-scale electrification, whether it's just the kind of usual things you think of, cars or buildings or whatever, transportation, buildings. But now with AI, if somebody wants to build one of those plants up here and they suddenly want to have a gigawatt, well, what do we do? Who pays for it? And how does it work? I would hope that our resilience planning, it really looks at the lens of renewable resources and demand response management, because those are important tools for us in resilience. The other one that I think stands out, and I saw this also in the Clean Energy New Hampshire report, is I think we really need to get back seriously to grid modernization. And how is that process going to produce cost savings for New Hampshire consumers? Whether we need to have policy mandates or requirements about enhanced grid technologies or virtual grids, given the billions of dollars that are likely to be needed for grid upgrades that are going to be on our consumers, if we can find ways like enhanced grid technologies and virtual grids and other things, distributed energy resources, microgrids, I think are going to be a good part of that as well. That I just don't see how our consumers can be saddled with billions of dollars of grid modernization. I just don't see it, and I think there's a way as an off-ramp for New Hampshire consumers for that. Related to that, of course, in grid modernization ought to be distributed energy resources and storage, and I hope that you look very seriously about how storage becomes a part of grid modernization and maybe reduces some of the necessity for it or provides us resilience as well, of course. With grid modernization too, we kind of took some look at that, the committee that my legislation set up, and then the interconnection one related to grid modernization. I think we're really in some kind of deep trouble about interconnection for all kinds of reasons. And so what policies can you offer us to get us to an interconnection fairness? I mean, again, some of it's driven by us on New England, but a lot of it's local. You hear the local folks are trying to get an interconnection point, whether it's a business or rooftop solar or whatever it is, and then the cost of upgrades for interconnection. What is a fair way to distribute those kinds of costs? And I mentioned earlier, I think we really need, in policy statement, look at a mechanism that deals with the potential new large users for AI. I know that some states are now looking at the AI groups, that if they want to build a cloud computing center and have all that power demand, that maybe they're not only responsible for the generation related to it, but also why shouldn't they also bear responsibility for grid upgrades and for interconnection upgrades rather than socializing over that across all ratepayers? And I think that's going to be important policy for us to develop to protect New Hampshire folks. Another one related to grid modernization is certainly going to be bidirectional EVs. There's so much potential there, I think, not only for resilience, but also for grid modernization to have, essentially a vast storage battery of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of cars. Related to grid modernization, too, is I think that there ought to be a state policy on metering technologies. We've talked so much about metering upgrades, smart meters, real time, you name it. And I really hope that there can be a policy consideration of what we do about those kinds of metering technologies. And then related to grid modernization, I do want to say something about gas pipelines and pipeline infrastructure. I mean, obviously, natural gas can be part of the energy supply picture for some generation, but certainly for homeowners and businesses as well. Got a lot of houses that are still on gas, Concord Lateral, you name it. What I am concerned about is if the federal government seems to be moving, and some states are getting on board about forcing the construction of a large new pipeline, and let alone the siting and local control, and so on and so forth. I mean, that's all political. But what's not political about it is who's going to bear the costs. I mean, I think the lowest estimate I've seen is $1 billion for it, and I can't imagine it'd be less than twice that. That becomes very expensive energy, and can we really expect the people of New Hampshire, in terms of these, call it grid modernization, include gas in that? Can we really expect our ratepayers to bear that. So I do hope that that'll be looked at as well. And then lastly, or two more things. One, in terms of generation diversity, you know, we've talked a lot about that, you know, there's such a tussle in the legislature between renewables and solar and so on and so forth. And, you know, we know that the all of the above has become an easy catch-all for folks and so forth. And fair enough, you know, I'm supported the nuclear bill that goes ahead, and we'll see what happens to it. But, you know, new technologies, let's see if they can come build in New Hampshire. Related to that, though, I do think that I hope this report the policy can take into account reasonable timelines in terms of generation capacities and new technologies. We know that, I guess the figures 98% of the new generation into the grid in the first quarter of this year was solar and wind. And, you know, that's a little extreme in terms of numbers, but it's the trend line that we've seen. So there are certain resources that are kind of here and now. Other ones we know are going to be years out. Some of the grid modernizations, the bidirectional EVs, what is going to happen to the wind, the offshore wind beats me. You know, the spigot got turned off, you know, 5-6 years ago, then it turned back on, and now it's been turned off again. I don't know. I mean, there's 8 gigawatts of energy sitting out there that we don't have a replacement for, but you know, what's a reasonable timeline to put on that? Well, at least now it's 7 or 8 years out. We also know that small modular nuclear is 10 years out. I mean, nobody disagrees with that. You know, there's possibly there can be some smaller ones that jumpstart, or you know, that are small units and so on and forth, and fine. But if you're looking at the 300 and 350 megawatt that you know, Google and GE and some other companies are building, you know, great units and so on, but it's really realistically 10 years out. So in a 10-year plan, you know, I think the evaluation ought to be in the policy is what is realistic to expect will contribute what to generation over the next years, and what do we do about that? In that, I would hope the generation diversity in the policy could also really put power to the people, give individuals, communities, and businesses enhanced ability to determine what kind of generation source they want, what kind of choice they want, and that they would have the interconnection to make that possible. And lastly, but certainly not least, is energy efficiency. You know, we know how to do this, right? I mean, I don't think there's any mysteries in energy efficiency, what all the techniques are and the things that work and so on and so forth. So I would hope that the policy could have realistic approach to it, to say, if we want to do this much, here's how much New Hampshire Saves needs, or if it needs to be an other entity, fine, or this is how much of a charge we need to put on utilities, or this or that. And then secondly, you know, the legislature is always going to come in, and we've done it in this budget, to muck around with the energy fund and so on and so forth. But I hope the policy includes a plan that says on energy efficiency, this is what the Department of Energy can do and actually will accomplish. That can realistically say that if the legislature puts money into something, that you can get it out the door. And this will be the impact of that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Just to piggyback on what you said, as far as the interconnection, like the Associated Grocers, that they were one of the, you know, they were screaming. But I don't know if that got fixed yet, or if that got resolved. But anything with the interconnection, I think you know, that's something to really focus on. Somehow, if we can streamline that, help individuals do that, because you know, that seems to be a sore spot right now. Thank you for that, by the way.
Whatever.
But
The
no,
English professor who's now an energy expert. How do you like that?
no, I like it. And you did bring up the energy efficiency, and is there a cost benefit to that we can, you know, are we saving money with that?
So a couple of things. Yes, on energy efficiency, you probably recall there was a bill that this committee heard earlier this session dealing with the Granite State test of whether or not to devolve the authority to review or change that test back to the Public Utilities Commission versus it's currently set in state statute. I believe the bill was re-referred. I think you heard from folks the value of that test, which the department agrees with. Where there is in that test, it's a dollar for dollar. You have for every energy efficiency measure that you take, there must be at least $1 worth of savings. So that's sort of, it's at least a 1-to-1, if not better than that. Usually it's, if folks have, energy efficiency measures done at their house, usually there's sort of a, depending on your auditing firm, will have a sort of a schedule out of things as to how long it will take for you to, earn your money back. I've seen some that are, quick as 4 months, 6 months, and they go, go out from there, and then you can sort of pick and choose based on that report. But so yes, on the Granite State test, that's the dollar for dollar requirement. I do have a follow-up question for Senator Waters on one of those. When you made the comment, about allowing individuals to choose sort of their resource mix, sort of the power to the people, sort of as I wrote it down. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that and what you envision for that? Is that just a matter of
Yes. What I'm trying to get at is that, look, it's obviously a legislative decision what we do about net metering, what we do about community solar, what we're doing about a community power coalition, and so on and so forth. And then, what capacity for microgrids and what capacity for industrial host, and so on and so forth. We see that the states around us who are approaching 20% on solar and other forms of renewable generation, if they're potentially their businesses and consumers are seeing lower costs and so forth, and distributed energy resources and so on. So I think we have a lot of bottlenecks in terms of regulation, but that's us. Politically, we're somehow renewable energy has become evil. Whatever. It's just all politics. But in terms of 10-year energy policy, what should the state policy be on enabling these kinds of transformations into modern technologies and basically local distributed energy resources? That seems to me to be related to an awful lot of our issues around transmission, grid and upgrades and modernization and almost anything else. But of course it's related to interconnection, as we know. There's the interconnection back. It can be hard for a business that wants to do, put up a solar, or a municipality put up solar, to know this can be able to plug in.
Right.
So anyways, this is nothing particularly mysterious or new. It's just that I think that this is a state that believes in individual choice and business choice, and the communities and others can some ways take control of their energy costs and energy supply.
Senator Pearl?
Thank you for that clarification.
Well, thank you. Good morning to both of you. I certainly, my colleagues have done a good job of outlining many important things. I think a couple more I would add to it is, waste to energy.
Yep.
We're certainly seeing a lot of, what's that?
I just wrote that down.
There you go. I should read it. I didn't read your notes, I promise.
No, it's all right.
We have a lot of conversations, especially in this committee, about solid waste, how we manage it, and waste energy is certainly needs to be a viable part of that. So I think that's a focus we'll want to look at, whether it be food waste. We've got some interest in bringing in business into our state, using food waste composting, and through the use of methane digesters, we can turn that into an energy source, and also, create some soil amendments, which is another thing that's near and dear to my heart, the agricultural side of it. But I guess the one thing I think we really have to keep a focus on is affordability. I do hear occasionally from my constituents about their desire to be able to, move in the energy sources of their choice, as Senator Waters has brought. But the biggest thing I hear is our electric rates are high and we can't afford it. And so I think that's a focus that we have to keep in the mix on this at a fairly high priority level. So I guess those are the kind of the 2 points that I would add on to what we've had.
Can I add something?
Yep.
Mr. Chairman? Yeah, I was interested in the discussion of the focus on rates in Clean Energy New Hampshire, and I didn't have time to really absorb it all. But I hope you take a look at that, 'cause I think it is a somewhat different way of thinking about affordability than just the rate structure itself. And so I'm sure you've read that. Yeah, so anyways, I saw that and I thought, Thanks.
So I will just add, you may recall, and the bill number escapes me. I want to say it was Senate Bill 161, but I'm probably wrong on that. That directed the agency to come up with rules for interconnections. So that is ongoing. We have the 6-month reports that we will send you. I think the last one was sent, I want to say it was in March or April, I think. Maybe it was even February. I'm sure it was while I was out, when it was sent in. But those are progressing. Obviously there's still areas of disagreement, but we're working on 2 rule sets. It will be the EN 900 rules for those for smaller interconnections, and then the EN 1000 rules, which will be for larger interconnections. So we're still, working through that process. Still getting stakeholder feedback, and working through those. So we're still, parties may disagree, but we're still planning on getting those to GELCAR by the required legislative deadlines.
When you say parties disagree, what parties?
So you will see there's some level of, and I will say I have not been as well versed in sort of the individual filings going back and forth and the individual tech sessions. There's certain areas of discussion about who's responsible for what's the proper model to use, and things like that in terms of sort of a base, and then working from there. I'd be happy to give you a more in-depth update, but I just wanted to reference that. I think that was sort of the.
Do you need clarifying language?
No, it'll just be a matter of, there will be a rule set that will be presented to GELCAR by the department will present that rule set to GELCAR. Whether or not everyone agrees with it, of course, I'm hopefully cautiously optimistic that everyone will get into agreement on things, but folks have very strong opinions, as they should.
Where would there be the strong,
I'm sorry?
in what areas are there disagreements, if you don't mind?
Just in terms of where, part of it is what's the best model for things, who pays for what, what the requirement should be in terms of timelines and things like that. I'm happy to bring additional information and do a write-up of where the exact sticking points are at the moment.
Senator Waters?
Yeah, and I appreciate the work you've done on that. And it's a tough nut to crack, and I mean that's why I wrote the bill, hoping that we could find some way forward, because initially I was looking at those models whereby if you have to bear the full cost of being the first one into an interconnection for that upgrade, can that not be apportioned out to the second, third, and so on and so forth, which has been done in other areas like infrastructure for land development and so forth. But I think that the struggle you're having there is just the kind of thing that I mentioned in my comments about other areas where how is it that we expect whom to bear certain costs? And is it entirely on the ratepayers? Is it entirely on the first business? Or is it, some kind of model? So I would hope that the model that you come up with will give you some kind of a basis for a policy that can extend to some of the other areas in which this kind of debate's going to take place.
And I will just say, I think you just sort of hit the nail on the head there. It's who pays for what, right? Who's responsible for what costs, and that really sort of underlies everything in utility regulation. Right. But that's a great summation of it.
Yeah, thank you.
So the legislators haven't made that clear then, who pays for what?
So this is a little bit, there are different theories in terms of utility regulation. Typically, the way that it is done is that whoever is the cause or the necessitates the need for the upgrade is the one who ends up paying the full freight for the cost, even though, as sort of Senator Waters alluded to, there may be others that benefit from that, right? Think of, I'll use a land development one because it's a little, well, actually, we'll just use electrical development. Say if somebody wants to install, a major solar array somewhere that, we're talking, interconnected to ISO New England or as part of a merchant project rather than something smaller. And, they have to pay for a number of upgrades to the local distribution system in order to accommodate that. Now, there may be other individuals, so they have to pay the full cost of making sure, there's three-phase power, all the transformers are up to date, if there's substation upgrades that are needed as a result of that, they pay the full freight of those costs. Now, they may have all of that build out may all of a sudden open up a couple of extra circuits where there used to be closed off to any development before, but now there's the extra capacity because they upgraded the substation to plug in more solar in on that circuit somewhere. So that developer there is benefiting from somebody else paying for all those upgrades versus if that developer had started on that second development first, they would have had to pay for all the upgrades going downstream, if that makes sense. So I think in Senator Waters' solution is there, okay, can somebody, the entity that caused the initial need for those upgrades, there, rather than all of those benefits won't necessarily be localized to that developer, right? There will be benefits to the grid, which is, there's always complicated, reviews of, whether, and that goes into rate cases and things like that, so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but there are other benefits that may accrue to other parties that aren't necessarily paying for them. So again, in that, once you've sort of opened up, you've broken through that, whatever that roadblock is, whatever that, issue is from an infrastructure standpoint, right? Whatever is preventing additional development from happening, somebody has to pay for that. In this case, it would be the initial developer. But if there's another developer somewhere else in the same area that all of a sudden gets to benefit, right? They can interconnect their project. They don't have all those expenses, but it was only because of that first developer paying for that project. And I think that Senator Waters has mentioned to figure out, is there a way to, the entity that paid those costs originally to be able to recoup those because some other development has been realized as a result of their money that they have put in.
Yes, so couldn't the new developer just pay the old developer?
Well, you have to figure out what the value of that is, and there's, how they wouldn't also necessarily know who had done that investment where in the system in order for them to be able to install their facility.
This is just getting too complicated. This is really
Well,
complicated.
Mr. Chairman, I had one version of my bill had said that, yes, the subsequent folks, there can be a clawback, and that then there'd be rulemaking that was done around how the cost would have been determined and the benefit be determined and what percentage then is reasonable for that recovery. And that got, again, it got very complicated, and that's why I thought we need to study this for a while. But I really think it is also applicable to so much else that we're going to see about grid modernization and enhanced grid technologies, metering, and so forth, that if we can come up with a model that fairly says how those costs get distributed, I think that'll make for a much more efficient system.
Megan, anything?
We're here to get your.
I'm trying, I'm
so,
just
yeah.
putting you on the spot. I think that's it. I don't have anything else on my radar. I really, mine was very simple in that, I would like to see a discussion over the local utilities being able to generate. That might be an issue that, and of course, have all the other issues that surround that, but I think the deregulation might, there are some downsides. There's just so many pieces out there now, and I don't want to interrupt the wholesale market as well, but I'd also like to see if they can, we can generate here in New Hampshire. I mean, you got one tower at Seabrook that's just used for parts. Well, let's revisit that and see if we can't, rebuild that and maybe let them generate, because that is in New Hampshire, right? A lot of the fear that hasn't, I remember when the Clamshell Alliance was out there and they were wondering about all these, these repercussions, but well, fast forward to today, well, maybe we should have allowed another tower to be built. And so just on my mind,
Let's bankrupt another utility, okay?
Yeah. But I think allowing the utilities to at least look at that might be another option. I know other states are doing it, so it's like the deregulation does have its downfalls. So natural gas, it would have been nice if they came through and they asked permission on the landowners and said, hey, you know what, we're going to give you some we're gonna give you a, some of the, yeah, just something. We got nothing out of it, and it was, I think that was the Kinder Morgan thing, and, you know, I think they handled it wrong. So, I think, you know, if we could have taken advantage of it, that would have been wonderful, but, there is a property rights situation going on. I don't know what the feds are doing. Somebody brought it to my attention, and I'm just talking. You know, when we said, hey, we're the live free or die state, right? We're gonna deregulate. Yeah, so we just went from the state regulation to federal regulations. We let the feds be our new taskmasters at this point. I don't know how accurate that is, but it's like, well, maybe we should take back some of the control. So, is that making sense to you?
Do you mean in terms of like what, in terms of citing for larger projects, or I'm sorry, in terms
Yeah,
of letting the feds?
basically.
So there are certain things that are FERC jurisdictional in terms of where they have a say on, and I'm, you know, recalling the Kinder Morgan pipeline. You know, there was I think former State Senator Jeb Bradley was involved in trying to sort of thread that needle of where you could exercise as much local control without triggering an automatic FERC jurisdictional type of situation where they could say, hey, that's great, I don't care about your requirements, this is happening under our requirements
Right.
instead. And I know that's sort of there's a careful balance there, right? Especially when there's a regional project that impacts, you know, beyond the state borders of whether a single state can squelch a project. However, on the other side, right, we have enshrined property rights in both the state and federal constitutions. There are certain requirements there that follow along with those, and legitimate concerns around those projects.
Yeah. Yes, it was. I went through all my district. So, you good? Yeah. All right. You're good?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
for being here. And do you have any suggestions?
This is really just a listening session for us, so I'm not here to offer any particular comment. But
I need a
to hear.
bill to simplify energy so everybody can understand it. I want a chart in crayons.
Just how big can the piece of paper be?
As big as this room, actually.
Get that magic pill that cures all ailments.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Send you this, Kevin. And Howard, this is
Okay.
very thorough and useful.
All right, Megan and Josh, thank you very much for your
All right.
time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Good luck with the house.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Max. I think with that, we're done.
All right.
All right.
So you guys
We're
send
adjourned.
the list of what you